Hello and welcome to another episode of Soul Nectar show that helps to inspire you to take that journey to find out who you really are in truth, not who you've been being in the world, who you thought you were, the story that your parents told about you and that you grew up with, but like that soul calling, that nectar that's just waiting to emerge from the inside of you to lead you on a whole different exciting journey. And I'm your host, Carrie Hummingbird. I love to be your guide to soul nectar. And today I'm really excited to have Laura Gisborne on with us. Welcome, Laura.
Hi, Carrie. Thanks for having me.
So Laura is an internationally recognized speaker and serves as a business consultant for business leaders and entrepreneurs in a wide range of industries. The innovative business model of her company, Legacy Leaders Global, exemplifies that companies can be both profitable and purposeful. Through her initiatives, thousands of women and children are receiving regular contributions in multiple countries across 5 continents. She has served as the guardian ad litem for foster children through CASA, parent education coordinator for family outreach, board member for Habitat for Humanity and Sedona School District, and is on the business engagement team of the Pachamama Alliance. And it seems a special place in my heart for that. She is the author of the book, Stop the Spinning, Move from Surviving and Thriving, and also the author of Limitless Women, and has been featured as a guest expert on both CBS and ABC, as well as on the national hit show, The List. So you can check out her work at lauragisborne.com, and I will provide a link for that in the email. So welcome, Laura, to Soul Nectar Show.
Thank you. So good to be with you, Carrie.
So excited to have you here. I was really impressed when we had our conversation about all the good things that you do in the world. Talk about being of service in so many ways to help so many people, and that really inspires me. And I know that you woke up in some way in your life to this calling to be so active in the world. So tell us a little bit about your personal journey that got you started in being such an amazing gift.
Thank you. First of all, let me just acknowledge you and say thank you. I'm honored to be here, and I love the work that you're doing and, creating impact. We're all doing our part, right? It's just that little bit of this network of, and you and I were just talking about becoming friends through Anastasia Chopelas, and, it's just wonderful to connect with you here. And, it's kind of funny. Have you ever been on a show as a guest where you actually hear somebody read your bio? It just sounds really interesting, like to be on the other side of it, because it's, I'm like you, I'm doing the best I can with what I know today. And my journey started very, very differently. I grew up, my mother was a teenager when she became pregnant with me. And right after she became pregnant, a few weeks later, my father was stabbed and killed. And so she was really in a hard place. And my childhood, was not a picnic by American standards. I was put in the context of American standards because the work we do today is really global. And I'm sure your audience is everywhere hearing this. And so different perspectives and different cultures and different places. But there was a tremendous amount of violence and abuse. And so that was my normal. And I really took that into my teenage years, into my early adult years. And I was blessed, I was blessed to have people see me when I couldn't see myself, and receive some amazing guidance and mentorship. And someone handed me Louise Hays' book, You Can Heal Your Life, when I was 21 years old. And it really was one of those moments where that changed the trajectory of how I saw things. That combined with a good friend that I worked with in the legal field who helped me get counseling. And so what was normal for me as a child was being in a situation of a lot of violence and abuse. So my early relationships were like that as well. And she helped me really overcome domestic violence and become healthy and really learn to have some self-esteem. So there was a whole lot of the journey that happened long before I get to do this work today. The work that I get to do today of really empowering women leaders to embrace philanthropy and charity causes is something that is, typical overnight sensation. I'm in my 50s now. So, I don't know how much of the journey you want to hear, but, like most people, I'm doing the best I can with each day.
That's so beautiful to share that journey, because I think that sometimes people get this idea, They see you in your 50s and they see you being successful and they say, oh, well, she was just privileged and
Right.
that's how she got to be in that spot.
Right. Yeah.
And that's just not my calling. I didn't get to walk that life. I think what's different when you have that background of how you started off in your life is that you can really have compassion and empathy for people who start off in a very desperate space. And you can also lift them up by saying, you don't have to stay there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, somebody had to see me when I couldn't see myself. Right. And I think it's a lot of the work that you do with really helping people with their purpose and really helping them find their voice. It's like, all of us, we've been there or we're kind of on another side of it, but it's only through helping each other out. One of my dear friends and mentors, Sandra Yancey, I love some of her quotes. One is give first, share always, which I love. We get to give. There's something in that I think is really important. And the other one is lift as you climb. And I just think like, what an honor. What an honor if we've come from a place where we really were in survival mode and that's all we knew, to be in a place where we actually get to give back is just very humbling, I believe.
It is. It is. And the other thing I think that you get to experience, which I think is so interesting, is you're talking about global work,
Mm-hmm.
is that your perspective totally changes when you get to experience vastly different ways of life.
Right.
Talk a little bit about that, because I'll just briefly say, in my experience, I had a very tumultuous 0 to 5. So I had 3 different dads,
Mm-hmm.
so right there, that's like a crack in the foundation of like, what
Mm-hmm.
is relationship, right?
Right.
And people would say, oh, that's terrible. You had to go through that. But actually it's a gift, because it created this question in my mind as to what is relationship?
Mm-hmm.
What is circumstance? Because our circumstance in each one of those is very different. It
Right.
wasn't the same. And then I continued on that way. I lived in all these we moved around a lot. So I lived in all these different communities. I grew up and I went to high school and junior high school in a community called Enfield, Connecticut, which is
Mm-hmm.
like very blue collar-ish, but
Sure.
also had some white collar. My dad was white collar, and we're like on a street, like in sandwiched in between people that were blue collar and were on welfare. And so I got to experience that. And then I went to Smith College, which is like an Ivy League school,
Sure.
with women that were like ambassadors' daughters, I went to
Mm-hmm.
that, so for me, it's just been so interesting to have the perspective of how all these different people live. And so talk a little bit about your journey, because I know you work globally. And so
Yeah.
how is that for you?
Well, it's so interesting. I remember when I went to England the first time, and I was in my early 20s, and nobody in my family had ever been out of the United States at that point. So it was kind of an interesting thing. And I took a student loan and I went over there and I was studying political science as my undergraduate degree. And I was studying comparative political theory. And it was, kind of my first taste of that international travel. And fast forward several years, when I started receiving my invitation, when I would say my calling, and I think you have a pretty open-minded audience to this, it was like something found me. I wasn't really seeking it, right? I'd had all my businesses and done the work I had done, but I started receiving these invitations. And one of them that was really compelling for me, Carrie, is like, I got a phone call that said, will you come and lead a breakout session at a women's university in China? And I think it was 2009 at the time, maybe 2010. And I thought, what's a breakout session? I have no idea what that was, but that was indicative. And then I got asked if I would come to India. And so the invitations for leadership and for the work that I do today, they didn't come like, hey, will you come down to the local Kiwanis? That wasn't what it was, right? It was like these really bizarre conversations. Will you come here? Will you do this work? Or I'd be introduced to somebody in Africa. And so I had a lot of prayer about it, a lot of meditation, just what is this? And, my conversations with God were like, I think you've got the wrong person, because I know these people that wanted to be speakers and go out and lead, and I hadn't written a book. It was like, who am I? Who am I to do this work? But I gently trusted the process and put my toe in the water, and then things would happen very quickly. And I think that, there's something in the bigger lesson for myself in my own life that I hope is helpful for others. That the things that happen for us gracefully and very quickly, to me really always feel like a divine appointment. It really feels like a blessing and a gift versus the things that I'm struggling to try to make happen again and again and again that just don't seem to come together. So the invitations really came globally. And I kept hearing the similarity or the synchronicity I could hear, Carrie, was that the invitations were global, they were around women, and they were around philanthropy. And although I've been doing volunteer work the whole time I was building my private sector businesses, right? I've had 9 companies. I've sold 6 of them. All while I was doing that work, I was always volunteering. And I think there was a part initially of me wanting to heal my own inner child, right? So I started with CASA. That was my first volunteer work, working with foster children, working with children growing up in violence and abuse. So it was probably a selfish, work for me. People always think, oh, that's such good stuff. But it was really, I was working on my own growth, right? And so as I started to follow the calling, and then I was in Southeast Asia, and I was in Africa, and I was in South America, I would just follow where I knew was right for me and show up. And, the conversation about philanthropy for a lot of people feels very overwhelming or big, or who am I? And someday when I get there, I'll give back. But it's not always about your money. There's the saying is that there's 3 ways that we can contribute. Tithing, which is what we know from the Bible, what we know, dollars and cents, is one way. Being able to share our time and volunteer to support in any way we can is important. But there's also something about how we bring our talents. You have a life experience that's very different than mine, although we may as sisters have an overlap, and we know other people have their skill sets. When we can bring our talents to organizations, we can really create a difference. So what I would do is just work with these different nonprofits and help them build and grow what I knew from the private sector. So it was kind of a marriage of bringing the nonprofit and the private work together. And my calling just happens to take me all over the world right now, which is awfully cool.
That's so cool. And right now, as you're talking, I was thinking to myself, I think that it's hard for us to see ourselves in this country because we are privileged.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter who you are in the United States.
Yes.
You are privileged. I know there's going to be a little debate about me making that statement, but it's true that if you live in this country, you are privileged than over like pretty much anybody in any other country in the world. I mean, except maybe Switzerland, but I mean, we have so many advantages. We have so many potentials, and we have the right to vote. Number one, we have the right to get out there and speak. And as women, we have the most freedom here because we really can do anything we want, and the system supports us in doing that.
Yeah, it's interesting because 2 weeks ago I was in Egypt, and my husband and I were in Egypt, and it was interesting because he had not traveled in Muslim countries with me before. And I had been there before. I'd been in other places in Africa and Saudi Arabia and different places without him. And he was really offended because as we're getting off the plane, all the men were just like cutting right in front of me. And he's like, what is wrong with these men? And I said, there's nothing wrong with those men. And as we spent time there, we were there for a while. As we spent time there kind of traveling around, it was such an eye-opener for him. Again, he's an American and we've traveled many places together, but he just hadn't been in that culture. Women were almost non-existent. You didn't see them out, right, in the world. And then when you did see them, they were completely covered. And so I would leave, the hotel or leave the boat we're on and put a scarf on and cover myself, cover my hands, my feet, everything, just out of respect for the people. And yeah, we just don't have a perception of how it is for other people in the world until we do. And I know when I was doing the research for Limitless Women, my second book, the statistic that we found, which is pretty on track still today, is that 2.8 billion people, that's almost 3 billion people, live on less than $3 a day. So when you actually, extrapolate those numbers and try to think of how would you take care of your family on $1,500 a year, we just don't have a perception. When I say about my childhood being rough by American standards, I always had water. I always had a roof over my head. And I know that's not the case for everybody in the United States, but for most of us, we have sufficiency at a level that it's hard to grasp how it is for others.
And we have an excess of material wealth as well, which leads to, I think, a deficit in a really important area, which is gratitude.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
When I actually traveled to Peru for the first time, I had stumbled across energy healing
Mm-hmm.
as a modality for my own personal journey of healing. And I started with the Four Winds Society, and I started with the Light Body, and they are derived from this Peruvian ancient wisdom. And that lineage in Peru, the Q'ero shamans, they support this work because
Mm-hmm.
they, and like many third world countries where they still practice, where they still have indigenous elders, they look to the United States and they say, you people are very sick, you need help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we don't see it that way in our culture. We think, oh, well, we're the most opulent, we're the best off, we're this or that. But what they see that we don't see until you take a journey to a country like that and work with these people and see it from their perspective through their eyes is that we have a spiritual deficit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's when we can really see the gifts that we've been given, and that the gifts that we've been given are like a two-edged sword. Like having so much requires even greater spiritual integrity.
Right. I agree.
It's like a right, and so it's like we've got to deepen into those muscles, and to see, otherwise it can lead to greed and all kinds of things which are really unpleasant to experience and witness. And I think that's what's happening in our culture is people don't know how to come, they're trying to fill up because they feel empty, but
Mm-hmm.
they don't know how to get to the true fullness, which doesn't
Yeah.
come from any of the stuff.
Are you familiar with Lynn Twist's work?
I've heard that name.
So Lynn Twist, she's spoken every year. I have a conference called Limitless Women, and I bring together 100 women to share ideas and resources with one another in a mastermind environment. And it's by invitation only, and I'm not trying to be exclusionary. It's just that, if you're interested, you can always find out more and connect with me, but I'd love to have you with us. So Lynn Twist is the author of The Soul of Money, and it's a book that really speaks to this. And she's one of the co-founders of the Pachamama Alliance. She's also one of the initiators of the Hunger Project in the 1970s.
That's where I know her
She's
from.
spent
Yeah.
her entire life working with Mother Teresa and the Dalai Lama to really create amazing change. And so she was with us again 3 years in a row. She's been with us at Limitless Women, and every time we get to hear her speak, it's just the whole room. We're all in awe of being in the essence of her brilliance. But why I bring that up is that, I went to South America with her to the jungle, to the Amazon, worked with the indigenous people, the Achuar people. And there's some beautiful lessons, just incredible lessons there. And I think that the whole idea of us being in developed nations, being sick is not necessarily how I interpreted it or how I was treated there. There's just a deep reverence for humanity and who we are as people, and how much we're so much more alike than we are different, right? In her book, The Soul of Money, was just republished. She was just on Oprah Super Soul Sunday a few months ago, and so her book was republished again. It's truly one of the greatest pieces of work, I think, to really talk about the energy of money and what it looks like to be sufficient. And again, this whole piece of how we get to give it's a place of expansion. So if people are interested in aligning their purpose with their profits, which is really what we do with legacy leaders, what we look at is, what does sufficiency look like, and how do we actually know that we're good? And part of that process is giving back, that we have more than enough. And sometimes when we're feeling scared, we're feeling less than, it's not easy to be in that place. So I love what you said about gratitude, because when we come back to focusing on what we actually have that's working for us, instead of kind of using the negativity bias of the brain, which most of us as humans experience more of that, like we get pulled to the negative instead of really celebrating the positive. When we can stay in celebrating the positive, we grow more of that in our own environment. And from that place of abundance, it's really easier to share.
And I think that people maybe haven't had the experience of surviving on very little.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the brain can make up a whole lot of stories about like having a lack.
Right.
When I was watching, I just can't get that out of my head. I was watching some segment of, and I do not watch TV. I just want to say that. I don't watch television for this reason, but
Right.
I happened to come across on Facebook, like it just scrolled right in front of me, and I got sucked
Mhm.
in to this episode with Dr. Phil, and he was interviewing this 15-year-old girl and her mother, and the 15-year-old girl was from Beverly Hills, and she was saying, like, I can't. My mom just cut my allowance from 5,000 a month to 2,000 a month, and I can't live on that.
Right.
I was in awe. Like I've never experienced that before. I was like, what are you talking about?
Well, there's the bigger purpose of the work that we do carry around healing the poverty consciousness of business leaders. And I can tell you that nobody comes to me and says, Laura, will you help me heal my poverty consciousness? But I can also promise you that I've had clients who have said to me, I don't know if I can afford that. I only have 500,000 in the bank. I don't know if I can afford that. I only have $1 million in the bank. And what lives for people is authentic and true for them. So the opportunity is to have us all recognize again what's enough and not be so driven by I need to have more because somehow I'm going to be more. People come to us usually with a struggle in building their companies around a time struggle. I don't have enough hours in the day to get it all done, or I don't have enough money or enough cash flow. They may have a lot of money coming in, but they're spending as fast as they're making it, so they don't really have profitability or, again, that surplus that doesn't feel right for them. What's always underneath that is a place of not enoughness for themselves. And so we really get down to the heart of who we are as individuals and leaders in our own families and our own communities, and really responsible for healing that. What's possible is pretty mind-blowing. It is within reach in our lifetime that hunger is no longer a conversation. And that's, again, by somebody pioneering that work in the 1970s that I know of. And now here we are in 2018. It's a typical overnight sensation, but it can be done.
Yes, that's so great.
Mhm.
So what are you finding? So you were called to work with women who were in third world countries, right? Or in China or someplace else around the world where maybe they didn't have the overt freedom that we have in the United States. They had a different way of living. What was it that you brought to the table to empower these women that was kind of filling a need that they had to hear?
It's such a great question. And I can tell you that, you know, we can talk, my arena is that I work in business, right? So I've been an entrepreneur since I was 23. So this is really the place where I get called to speak about. But what ends up happening in the leadership conversation is it's always a personal development conversation first. So the work that I do and what that we do as a community, because it's not really about me at this point, is actually bridging the gap. It's marrying women who are entrepreneurs that have their own companies with women who aspire for change, right? So there's kind of bridging the gap as we've come through our own journey and grown and evolved and learned some new things. It's all about the giving back, right? It's about the giving and the receiving. So there's something that you've heard, the gift is in the giving. So we actually receive by giving. And so partnering women that have had some financial success, whatever that is, right? It doesn't have to be wealth. It can be a place where they've had sufficiency and success, with women who don't have access to resources like water, education, housing, healthcare, these things that we very much take for granted. By being able to partner those two entities, if you will, those two energies, there's a great healing that's happening in the giving and the receiving, if that makes sense. So I just feel like I am the maybe the facilitator of some beautiful marriages and partnerships. And what we find on a global scale, because of the lack of resources for women globally in most countries, not all countries, obviously, but in many, many nations, is that our dollars can go very, very far. So what looks like a small amount of money, and I'll give you an example. There's an organization that we support called the Power of Love that's based in Zambia. The founder actually lives in California, but all the work is done on the ground in Zambia, in Lusaka. For $150, we can sponsor a woman to start her own business. And it's kind of a fascinating thing. So my daughter and I actually went there. And that's part of the work, right? For me, is that before I give voice, if you will, to a nonprofit and try to raise funds for them, I want to vet them. I want to be a good steward of the voice that I have and make sure that before I ask somebody here who is looking for an opportunity to give, to partner with somebody who wants to be a receiver, that there's actually a match and that the infrastructure is there. So my daughter and I were in Zambia, and what I saw that was so impressive, Carrie, is that women took that $150, and there's two models that are pretty common there. One is that they will walk from their inner city, just poverty-stricken shack, miles to go and pick up vegetables from a wholesaler, bring them back to the village, and then sell vegetables from basically a blanket on the ground. They pay back that $150, and then they get a second infusion from that blanket on the ground. I met several women who had built storefronts where they actually owned the real estate. They actually owned the storefront with refrigeration, which I know sounds so simple, but it's huge there, and employees. So not only do they provide for their family, not only do they improve the economy of their environment and bring more resources to their community that they don't have there, but they become employers. You know, when we think about like Fortune 500 companies, we actually look at the number of employees that Walmart has, or that Coca-Cola has, or the GM has. And regardless of what you think about any of these entities, these big multinational companies, they provide jobs, they provide opportunity. So here are these women taking what is $150, which is such a small amount to most of us in the United States. We can make that happen and provide not only a livelihood for that woman, but her family, and change some lives in her community. That's some pretty mind-blowing stuff.
That just blew my mind.
That's why we do the global work. Not that we don't want to help locally. We do help locally as well. You know, over 5 continents, North America is one of our continents. But man, a little bit goes a long way in a lot of places. And it's exciting to be a part of that work.
Well, you know what is so fascinating to me is that the Kara shamans say there's a prophecy that when the eagle and the condor fly in the sky together, that the Western woman leads the way.
Yes.
It sounds like you've heard that. And
I had actually, Lynn Twist told that story 3 years ago at Limitless Women. That's the first time I'd ever heard it. Yeah, it's incredible.
It's a powerful prophecy, and all the people know this. All the indigenous people know this prophecy.
Yes.
And I think it's so interesting because that is exactly what's happening. If you look into the world, the Western women are waking up and saying, wait a second, there is got to be a better way. And okay, so you were talking about the giving and the receiving. Here's why I think that works. Because if you're living in opulence, you've got everything you need, it can be a little empty if you're not of purpose. You're still, the purpose piece is critical for that soul feeling good.
Yes.
I mean, I've had a experience of this, you know. I had a great business. I'm an entrepreneur, you know, my whole life. I just can't seem to work for anybody else. I don't know why. And just very inventive. I have to be creative. For me, I need that. I need that creative outlet. But I had this business doing technical writing, you know, for a long time. Before I found out that I'm a soul guide, I had no idea that was around the corner. None. That was a total surprise.
Right.
Welcome surprise, but a total surprise.
Yes.
But because it's so fascinating. But, you know, this other thing I did was very successful. You know, it was like, I just snapped my fingers if I needed some work, and like, bam, there was more work. You know, it's more than I really could do. And it would just show up, you know, and I would do it. And I had a lot of nice things. You know, I had a nice home. I had a huge art studio. I had lots of nice things, but I still managed to sabotage my life, you know, because I wasn't in the right place inside of me.
Right.
That had to be right first. So I've rebuilt my life. I've reinvented myself because I needed to have this centering, like,
right,
this is right. Then everything else can be created from that right place.
Right.
So I think that's really the work of the Western woman, is especially, you know, if you're sort of hanging out in a spot that's pretty awesome, right? But you're kind of like, yeah, but it's not that fulfilling. You know, I think fulfilling is really the new frontier. It's like, if we can find a way to be of purpose in the world, or some gift that we're sharing, even we touch one person's life today, that makes it all so fulfilling to be here and doing what we're doing.
Yes, absolutely. So are you familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
Yes.
All right. So, in my book, I write about moving from surviving to thriving. Maslow, and I'm working on my third book right now, so I've been doing some research about this, and we know how we kind of move up the pyramid. If somebody doesn't know, you just start in sufficiency, or survival mode, and then you kind of move up to sufficiency, and then you have connections with others, and so you can look up Maslow's hierarchy of needs and get the whole pyramid. But what he wrote about in his later years, after all that was published, was this next level. And it's been funny for me because I've been saying, self-actualization is fascinating, but so what? The soul is still craving something deeper. The soul is still craving. And I believe that giving causes growing. I believe that we get to give. I believe that it is a whole nother evolution for us as humans. And what I find is fascinating, that as this is my own personal discovery is happening, in this kind of movement for social consciousness is being growing, really, is that as women, we are wired to give. It's how we are. It's, we're creators. We're created for childbirth. I mean, we are by our nature. And what I see is that the secret sauce, if you will, is community. And most of us that are, my age, a lot of my friends, my age and a little older probably, grew up in a very patriarchal, male-dominated environment. So even in life and business, we were successful, but we were successful in a very masculine model. A feminine model is actually all about collaboration and community. And this is timeless. And it's interesting going in Africa. I was working in Kenya with a different nonprofit, the Unstoppable Foundation. We give them a plug, which is incredible. And what I saw there was so precious. It's the way that women create their own giving circles, right? So these women, again, have very, very little by what we would consider financial resources, but they don't have free education. They have to pay to send their kids to school. So each of them will come together, and I don't remember if they get together once a week. I want to say once a week, and everybody brings $1, and that's what they can do. And that's a lot of money to them, right? But then when in the community each month, one of the women actually gets to be the recipient of whatever she needs. It could be something in the way of healthcare for someone, for her family. It could be that her son needs a school uniform. It could be that they're having, some kind of life celebration or a funeral on the other side. But the community comes together and women create this very organically. So the work that I'm doing now with Limitless Women, we just passed $230,000 in donations, which was a big milestone for us as a company. That that wasn't all my giving. That was each of our community members coming together and everybody contributing at these live events that we do as business training fundraisers. So everybody contributes what they can, and over the course of years, as we're growing, we're creating way more impact, more scholarships, more opportunities for education for women, more health care. It's really a beautiful thing to be a part of, but it's not about one person. None of it's about one person. And as women, when we can remember that we get to give, and when we give in community and we get to be a part of a sisterhood and support for one another, we're really remembering our divine feminine. We're remembering who we are and what we're here to do.
Yes, we need to remember our divine feminine and collaboration. And definitely I'm comfortable with that model. I think that what has disrupted that model has been competition.
Mm-hmm.
So talk a little bit about, you're talking about these other cultures where people just naturally still are in that mode where the women are creating the fabric of the community and supporting one another. And we can very aptly say that that's not a natural thing in the US exactly. It takes a little effort.
I think we've been repatterned, hun. I think it's not our fault. We're actually a very young country. So we've been, one of the most successful countries financially, but that's not always the case. And that's not probably the case forever. And unless we make some changes. So for me, what it feels like for women in developed nations that have been in a more traditional industrial model, if you will, is that we've just kind of forgotten who we are. And it's an interesting. My grandmother went to the same Southern Baptist church for 70 years. I'm 52 this year. She's now 91. And so from the time she was 14 till the time she was 84, she attended the same church. And this is in a small town in South Carolina. And that's kind of the center. She and her sister, there was this place where, again, when somebody got sick, people from the church would bring potluck, right? They would bring food to the house. And then there's kind of Wednesday night Bible study where people get together. And whatever your belief system is, it's not about this being a Christian environment. It's more about what happens in communities. So I think that this is not a new paradigm in the United States, but I think as we've kind of polarized to cities, we've forgotten. We've forgotten about the connection of who we are as humans. And I think that's probably why, your calling has had you work with Indigenous people, and mine has as well, is that, what's new is not so new.
Yeah, exactly.
I was called a few years ago to go to Ireland, and this, maybe a little far out, but I received several visions while I was there. And really this message of remembering how much we're alike all over the world is, again, not a new thing. Women and men, probably alike, have very similar hopes and dreams everywhere. We want to be seen and heard. We want our loved ones to be safe. We want a fruitful life, whatever that is. If that means good crops, great. If that means good business, great. But our desire for health and companionship is not a new conversation.
And we need to remember who we are
Yeah.
and make those connections. And part of the work that I've learned how to do is exactly through that, because I realized, and this sounds a little strange maybe, but I realized that sometimes in our culture, the way that things evolved, and I don't know the history of why it is the way it is exactly. I just recognize it.
Mm-hmm.
This is sort of like experience of women kind of backbiting or like competing or this kind of thing happening, that we kind of pitted against each other, so to speak, and it can be it's passed on mother to child, so your mother ends up being sort of like a competitive sister in a way.
Yeah.
And we've got to break those cycles. And when we break those patterns and those ancestral patterns and the things that we see within ourselves, and we do the inner work to break that, we can walk into a more authentic relationship where, your mother can be your biggest cheerleader, your mother, that's the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily like you're, if we're not given the resources and we don't have the help, then we can end up kind of having children in a way that we don't have support, we don't have a community around us, and it can end up being an unsupported experience.
Well, here's something so exciting, right?
Yeah.
I used to actually use that exact terminology of breaking cycles of poverty when we talked about the mission statement of our company. And we've chosen to shift that to healing cycles of poverty rather than breaking them.
Oh, that's so good. That's so good.
It's a more gentle way, which is a more feminine way, right? And I can tell you that my son will love this. He shall remain nameless, God bless him. So I have a son who's a geneticist. And when he was a teenager in high school, I said to him, you probably have different DNA. This is almost 10 years ago. I said, I feel like you have something different, like your genes are different, your DNA is different because of the healing that I was blessed with as a young woman. So you were born into a different family. So not only is our family dynamic different psychologically, but I felt that there was some physical manifestation of that. And he said to me at the time, he's like, Mom, of course, that's crazy. I mean, that's not true. It can't be possible. Well, what's fascinating for me now that he is a geneticist, like he's literally gone through college and graduate school and internship and done all this stuff, is he said to me a few years ago, he said, you're not going to believe this, but there's this whole area of genetics called epigenetics.
Yes.
It's how the genes actually shift and change. And he said, how did you know that? I said, well, I don't know that I knew anything, but I just had a sense, right? And so I think that there's something, again, in the divine feminine for each of us. And when I say for each of us, so if you have men listening to this recording as well, the balance of the masculine and the feminine is really important in each being. And none of us are going to be truly the leaders that we're here to be by trying to make somebody else wrong, right? So it's this kind of balance of women finding their voice and finding their ways to be strong and collaborative, and the men who really see us, who respect their wives and their mothers and their daughters, and how we all work together for the healing of the planet, is where I see those cycles of poverty and scarcity going away. And we've never had the opportunity to be as connected as we are today, right?
It's
I mean,
so
you and I
true.
are in completely different places, and we're having this conversation. It's beautiful, and we don't know who is actually going to get to see this later, in the hopes that maybe the message will help them have the confidence and the courage to heal in their own families. And that healing is, again, moves us up, I believe, as a species, for more kindness and more wealth for everyone. There's enough to go around.
There's enough to go around, that inner
Mm-hmm.
wealth. And
Mm-hmm.
it's by doing our healing and I think by rising above our paradigm. I just
Mm-hmm.
want to go back to that for just a second,
Yeah.
because you had those experiences, I had those experiences of going to other cultures and seeing how they do things,
Mm-hmm.
and then feeling the resonance of that within my
Right.
being. It feels so whole,
Mm-hmm.
compared to how I had been feeling. But then when I did my inner work, over the last 8 years or so with this path, and healed from the inside out, now I'm able to recreate that in my own family, right? I'm
Right.
able to have that with my mother, because I see those other patterns going and go, no, we're going to put that aside. I
Mm-hmm.
I love my mother, right? So
Yes.
it's like that deep healing, and shifting the patterns, like you're talking about, shifting them with
Mm-hmm.
love into a new direction, because you've seen the potential for it.
Right.
So the first thing is awareness. We got to be aware of where we are. And if you've got $1 million in the bank and you're not sure if that's enough, I just recommend some visits to some indigenous places, and just,
It's beautiful, isn't it?
it's a beautiful, because you
Mhm.
might realize how wealthy you are,
Yeah.
and how wealthier you could be on the inside as well. That's really the most important place to be wealthy, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, that's a beautiful, thank you for all the work and for all that insight, so one last question I have for you, I guess,
Sure.
is, let's say somebody doesn't know where to get started. Like, let's
Mhm.
just say they're like, I love the way this sounds, and I have no idea. Like, I'm not going to travel to Africa and meet people. I don't
Mhm.
know how that's done, but I want to contribute, but I also don't want it to be a scam.
Right.
Because there's these fears, right? Like,
Mhm.
oh, this dollar doesn't really go to who you think it goes to, and so how does somebody get started that really has that passion and wants to be of service, or maybe has some money that they can contribute, or has some skills? Like, where's the starting point for all that?
Thanks for asking. It's really such an important question. So I would say, um, if someone's listening and they want to make a difference, I would go back to where I said there's three ways to contribute. Tithing or dollars is just one way. One of the most rewarding experiences I've had, and that many of my friends have had as well, is the opportunity to volunteer. So in your local community, you probably have a food bank of some form or fashion, or within a smart, I tend to live very rurally. I live in a small town in the mountains now, and I'm about 2 hours from the major city. So, if you go to a city, I promise you, they have a food bank. They have a homeless shelter. If that's not your cause, if you love animals, the Humane Society always needs volunteers. Get out there and do that. If you feel that shelter is an important aspect, check out Habitat for Humanity. There's chapters all over the world. If you're interested in education, look at where you can volunteer, at a library or at a school. So I would say that's really the first step for someone, is to get out and give your time, just your hours. You don't have any special skill set. You just have to sometimes be a body, and that's wonderful. The next piece is, if you have a specific talent, as you work in an organization that you feel comfortable with, and you can feel that level of trust that this is a right calling for you, maybe you have a way to contribute a talent. Maybe you're an electrician and you know something special, or maybe you're an accountant or a bookkeeper and you can contribute and volunteer those skills. That's another way to go. And the dollars, for me, again, a very little bit goes a long way. What I encourage all of our clients, to do is to automate their giving. So if you find something that matches for you after you've kind of vetted it and you feel comfortable there, is, get on an automated giving in the same way that we teach people in financial literacy to do debt reduction by automatic payments, and some skill sets that we teach women as far as growing their own personal financial independence. This piece of automatic giving, if you can give $5 or $10 a month, but you set that up as an automatic payment, it feels good. So over the course of the year, $10 a month becomes $120 a year. And as I was telling you earlier, if you connect with an organization where they're providing microloans, $150 can help somebody start their own business. It can really be life-changing. So little amounts go a long way. In Cambodia, one of the organizations that we support, for $250, you can build a well that brings an entire community of about several hundred people fresh water. You can imagine life without being able to pick up a glass of water when you could for that small amount. And maybe it takes you 2 years at $10 a month to get to that dollar amount. But can you imagine being able to have the impact of 500 people being able to have drinking water? Small amounts go a long way when it becomes a part of your lifestyle.
I love that. So do you have all those opportunities listed someplace that people could go peruse, like all the groups that you support?
No, Carrie, but you know what? I think if somebody Googles, nonprofits, I wish that I could tell you off the top, because ours tend to come to us, we choose 3 charities each year to support. And then we have ongoing support going on for them. But there's, again, for our organization, we can raise a lot of money in a very short period of time. We can raise $30,000, $60,000 in a weekend. So we do a lot of vetting before we put people out. So I can tell you the organizations that we've worked with that we really love, that we continue to support, are the Unstoppable Foundation, which provides all kinds of amazing pillars for people so that they can have sufficiency. So education, healthcare, entrepreneurship training, clean water, shelter, that type of thing. So look up the Unstoppable Foundation. The Pachamama Alliance I've spoken to. That's Lynn Twist was one of the co-founders there. If you have a calling for supporting Indigenous people, we've had a lot of conversation, and you said that's near and dear to your heart.
Yeah.
The Power of Love Foundation, which provides microfinance and microloans, is one of our favorites. For women in business, eWomen Network Foundation is another organization that we love, that we support ongoingly. And I could go on and on. Habitat for Humanity, I've worked with for years. They're everywhere. So again, a little bit goes a long way. Don't feel like someday when you get there, you could make a difference. But those are all organizations that I can give you a quick rundown. And then do your own homework. Look at what's in your neighborhood. Hunger is still alive and well in the United States, and it doesn't have to be. We have more than enough resources. So I encourage people, if they're just getting started, to find a local food bank. That's an incredible way to create great impact and really save lives of adults, women, children, all ages. That doesn't have to take a lot of your time and money, and it can really create a big impact locally at your home.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. So now if somebody wants to work with you, let's say somebody's like very intrigued by your Limitless Women and they're like, I want to be one of those Limitless women.
Yeah, thanks for asking. So limitlesswomen.com is kind of a hub. We've actually just filmed 12 episodes of an online TV show that we'll be putting out soon. We're in production of that.
That's exciting.
Of just, what I would say is, ordinary women like you and I doing great work in the world. And how do we bring more awareness to these causes? There's every cause matters. So how do we all, again, bring more awareness? So that's one of the things. Limitless Women is one way to find me. And then my name is Laura Gisborne. Obviously, you can connect with me on Facebook or go to my website and reach out to me there. There's a contact form. You can right to me personally anytime.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Laura, for sharing your wisdom with us today and your beautiful bright light. Wow, what a force of nature. Did you ever think that you were going to be sitting here at this point in your life, like being of service in so many ways?
No, I feel like in some ways I'm so much in my infancy, and I'm super excited about the community of women that are coming together, around me, and how we get to support each other. That's really, it's a very humbling, exciting adventure, and I'm very honored.
Well, and it's never too late to start, because your first book that inspired you is Louise Hays.
Yes.
And I was shocked to find out when I did a little bit of research on her, is like just passing research. She didn't even start that work until what, her like 70 or 65
Yeah.
or something?
Well, yes, it's kind of an amazing thing.
What?
I'm not sure exactly how old she was, but again, she definitely changed the trajectory of my life. And I have no idea, like how many millions of other lives she's changed, but every voice matters. And I think every one of us doing a little bit can create amazing impact. So thank you for what you're doing. And thank you for having this conversation about the soul and the purpose, because, we're here for a reason.
We are, and it feels good to follow it, people. So, it's like it might be a little inconvenient. You can't watch television like on Friday night, but you could go at the food bank and help out, and it would feel like so fulfilling. I always like to tell people, Laura, to run an experiment.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be a
Right.
permanent change, right? But this is one
Right.
way I get my
No.
ego out of the way, because my ego, I've got a lot of willpower, which is a good thing, and also it can get in the way.
Right. Right.
So I always tell people, just run an experiment. It puts the ego aside. It's like, oh, okay, I only can do this once or twice. I'll try it. I don't have
Right.
to commit to it. And
Yeah.
then you just go try it and see what happens. You might find yourself being like a junkie for it, like like Laura and I
Yes.
can't
So
help
good.
but give back.
So good.
Well, thank you so much. And everybody, thank you for tuning in for Soul Nectar Show. I hope you feel inspired to go out and make one change today, to be of service in some way with your time, your talent, or your treasure, to make the world a better place for even one person. It makes an impact. Blessings to you guys. And I always give kisses. So if you can join me if you want to. Here they come.
Mwah.
Love you guys. See you next week. Bye.